This time, my backstory comes with its own backstory. To understand my hang-up with David Bowie, you first have to understand a few things about my father and his ideas about music. A fair amount of it came as a result of his experience in the early days of the Allman Brothers. The thing about rock in 1969 is that some of the best-selling and certainly the most influential acts were guitar hero groups from England. Cream, Jimi Hendrix Experience, Led Zeppelin, Jeff Beck Group, for example. So what happened was, after Duane Allman made a name for himself as a session musician, playing with the likes of Wilson Pickett, Clarence Carter, and King Curtis, many saw Duane as perhaps the first American guitarist that could hang with the English guitar gods. The idea that seemed to come from most of the record companies was to set Duane up with his own power trio and try to present him as another Clapton, Page, or Hendrix. This also included not just his music, though, but also his style, his persona, his stage show, the whole bit. Well, Duane wanted none of it. He had a clear idea of the kind of music he wanted to make and the environment he needed to get there. And he had the personality to stand up to anyone that tried to make it otherwise. It was his idea to have a sextet instead of a trio. It was his idea to have 2 drummers and 2 lead guitarists. And it was his idea not to have a front man. I mean, all manner of music industry folks caught on to the fact that the Allman Brothers had a statuesque blonde with a soulful voice and tried their best to get Greg out from behind the organ, put him in tight jeans and a feather boa, and make him the front man. You know, add some smoke machines, have him dance around a bit, the whole 60s psychedelic scene. After all, Robert Plant was Jimmy Page's front man, Rod Stewart was Jeff Beck's front man, so what better than to make Greg Allman Duane Allman's front man? We'll sell millions. Of course, my father was right in the middle of all these commercial histrionics. At age 22, he became an integral part of this new kind of musical thing called the Allman Brothers Band. And the more folks tried to dictate to them what they should be doing, the stronger he resented it. That brings me to Bowie. I remember hearing Suffragette City on the radio. And I remember hearing Fame on the radio, and I remember thinking they both sounded cool. But in my teens, when I would talk to my dad about music, I remember him expressing such strong negative things about not just Bowie, but really any music that he felt had a theatrical or stylistic component. He called it ballet. In his mind, music should just be music. Art is art and should exist outside of fads and fashions. If part of what you're doing hinges upon how you look or how you're dressed, your work doesn't count as art. After a bunch of these kinds of conversations, I ended up thinking that as cool as these songs sounded to me at the time, I had to be wrong, at least on a philosophical level. I mean, Dad obviously knew more about music than me. And then 80s Bowie happened. Let's Dance, Modern Love, China Girl. I could not get behind this music at all. And then I learned that Bowie ended up taking credit for the guitar work that Stevie Ray Vaughan did on the Let's Dance album. And then Bowie tried to fire SRV from the subsequent tour, and that was just more confirmation. Dad must have been right about Bowie all along. A style over substance fashionista, not a true musician. But Ziggy Stardust is far too iconic for me to ignore it forever. So, here we go. Right out of the gate, 5 years. Jeez, what a way to start an album. This is an absolute sucker punch. Know what it reminds me of? Ever seen the movie Melancholia, directed by Lars von Trier? It's a movie about a woman getting married only to realize that she's at least subconsciously not ready to conform to her expected societal role, so she begins acting out in more and more extreme ways. And at the end of the movie, no kidding, a rogue planet collides with the Earth and all life ends. That's how this song feels. And from here, Soul Love plays with time, dropping in bars of 2 in the verses. Moon Age Daydream goes hard. Hang On to Yourself goes punk before there really was such a thing. It Ain't Easy has a giant killer chorus. I do have to question if maybe Bowie thought his audience wasn't that intelligent, though. That maybe somehow we wouldn't get the message unless he made his central point over and over again. So he included songs called Starman, Lady Stardust, Ziggy Stardust, and Star. Yes, we get it. Star can mean bright celestial body, and it can also mean entertainment mega celebrity. Very clever. Here's something I'm noticing more and more while I'm learning the album. Even though I couldn't point to any one song as being particularly musically interesting in and of itself, well, that's a lie, Suffragette City. Still, I come away from each spin feeling like I've been through something moving and more than a little cinematic. It's like this. While I was in college, I had a friend play me the Frank Zappa Fillmore East 1971 album, the white one, for the first time. The thing he said afterward always stuck with me. He said, "You can't really play anything after that, can you? You can't go from that to Hot Legs." This album is like that. Let me think about all of this some more and try and integrate into my brain some kind of way where all of this makes some sense. It's not shock value. That's the thing I've learned. Look, growing up, I was nowhere near hip enough or plugged in enough to get this album. I just wasn't. Wauchula, Florida in the 80s was not a place to find many people who would have been comfortable entertaining the idea that anyone LGBT or Q was deserving of basic respect. That kind of makes me a teenage homophobe, at least by peer pressure, if nothing else. Projecting myself back to how I thought during that time, I would not have been able to hear a song like Lady Stardust. It would have gotten my back up. At best, I would have dismissed it as being transgressive just for the sake of shock value. But that ain't it. Turns out David Bowie is pretty important. He's important because he gave not only voice, but also dignity, humanity, and gravitas to people that didn't see themselves reflected in anything nearly so popular or influential. He's important because he looked that way, he dressed that way, and he sang about those things. Not because it was transgressive, it was, but because his heart was big enough and his vision was strong enough to be who he was without filter or apology. Like Duane Allman, David Bowie had a clear idea of the kind of music he wanted to make and the environment he needed to get there. And he had the personality to stand up to anyone that tried to make it otherwise. And what I'm hearing in The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars is that David Bowie was able to integrate this voice into some good music, but also into a relatively cohesive and compelling narrative. More cohesive than The Wall, anyway. And as much as it might piss off Butch to admit it, that's art. Now, having said all that, I still personally struggle with a lot of other glam albums from that era. I still haven't been able to really enjoy T-Rex or the New York Dolls, though I have tried a few times. But I do think I have to take a closer look at Bowie's 70s catalog. Brooks is forever trying to get me into hunky-dory, because Ziggy Stardust, yeah, it's pretty amazing.